are. I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next, the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am talking with musician, producer, composer, radio host, and most recently podcast presenter, Ben Vaughn, who is 5 episodes into his podcast, Straight from the Hat with Ben Vaughn, where he shares various stories from his years working both in independent music circles, major label music circles, some of the experiences that he had getting into making soundtracks for TV shows, for example, Third Rock from the Sun. And in fact, Ben Vaughn is right in the midst of working on new material right now. So, constantly active in one way or another creatively. And one of the stories, which does actually turn up in episode 5 of Straight from the Hat with Ben Vaughn, is how he ended up being the producer on the Ween album 12 Golden Country Greats. And that was indeed one of the stories that I wanted to talk with Ben about, as well as discussing some of his very interesting musical history and his insights on the music business. And so if you enjoy our conversation about Ween, you will definitely enjoy the extended discussion of Ween, how he got to know the duo, and how he basically ended up getting a star-studded cast of session musicians in Nashville to play on a Ween record. But like I say, from his many, many years of working in the music world and the TV world, Ben has got a lot of very interesting experience and insights of the music business, which I very much enjoyed talking with him about. And you can hear our conversation in but a moment. I will put links in the description for all the places where you can check out Straight from the Hat with Ben Vaughn. You can follow me on all social media at Tom Osman Sounds. You can go to my website, tomosmansounds.com. to check out my music and my writings about my music. Oh yes, I'm also on Ampwall as well, so go check that out too. I will jump straight over now to my conversation with Ben Vaughn as we discuss various key points in his long artistic career and his podcast, Straight from the Hat with Ben Vaughn. I'm sure in your many years working in the music world, you've had studio recording mishaps, but in my own minor capacity, I've had situations where I've been interviewing someone and then about 15, 20 minutes into a really, really nice interview, I went, oh, I didn't press record.
Oh, man. Oh, wow.
Have you ever had a recording session where you realized that you weren't recording?
No, but I've had situations where I accidentally erased a part that was recorded, which is heartbreaking. Like I remember one time in particular, it was a harmonica solo that was really hard to play. And I did a punch in and realized and this was back in reel-to-reel tape, so you couldn't go back and reverse it. It was gone. I had to play the whole thing over again.
Yeah, that's
thanks for bringing that. Thanks for making me remember now.
To bringing the trauma back to you. So
exactly now.
Where exactly are you?
I am in the Mojave Desert.
Because I was listening to the first episode of your podcast, and now that you mention that, you did say something about being in the desert, because your co-host Laura Pochodylo is in Nashville, right?
Yes, she's in Nashville, and I'm in parts unknown is what we call it, but I'm up in the Mojave Desert,
so
near Joshua Tree.
Okay, yeah, my US geography is terrible, but Joshua Tree is at least a landmark I'm familiar with, so that means something to me.
Yeah.
So we are here in large part to talk about your podcast, but mentioned with Laura Pochodylo, your Straight from the Hat with Ben Vaughn. So I never planned to make podcasts, and I'm sure through much of your career, podcasts didn't even exist as a thing. So how does having a podcast compare to being a radio presenter?
Oh, how does it compare? That's an interesting question. Well, we're not queuing up any music, so I'm not playing any records, and my radio show is based on my record collection, so that's gone. Although, what we achieve on this podcast is my record collection coming to life, really, like describing the human beings that made this music. I had throughout my career, I've been really lucky to work with a lot of my heroes and a lot of obscure artists in my record collection. And Laura is a lot younger than me, and her love for older music is really fascinating to me because the way that she has a feel for this older music as if she was there when it was new, and she wasn't, but I was, and so she was interested in hearing me talk about the people I've worked with and met, and we decided, you know what, let's roll tape, talk about this for a little bit, and play it for some other people and see if they enjoy it, and we got an enthusiastic response right away, and so here we are doing it.
Well, I can say, yeah, the first episode where you talk about Lynyrd Skynyrd and Gene Pitney and Dwayne Eddy was very entertaining. So
Thank you. Thank
if
you.
it's a model for the rest of it, and I am also particularly interested to hear episode 2 where you're going to talk about Attila, the short-lived rock band featuring Billy Joel. So I won't ask you to repeat the same story, but yeah, for people listening who haven't checked it out yet, I think it looks very entertaining. So, like, on the topic of the format of the podcast, obviously you don't know what topics your co-host's going to pull out of the hat, but do you know which topics are actually in there in the first place?
Some of them. I wrote down a bunch of names and gave them to her, and then she wrote down some without telling me what they would be. So every now and then she'll pull one out, and I'm like, "Whoa, okay, I need to readjust and think about this." But no preparation at all, no notes, because getting into the podcast business, we didn't want to do anything scripted because that's just too work intensive. She has a real job. You know, she runs Sun Records in Nashville. She's very busy, and I got a lot of stuff going on. So we thought if we're going to do this, it needs to be very loose and really organic and in the moment, which it is. It worked out great. We were really surprised by how uh, I guess I don't know how not only how funny some of it turned out to be, but they're like kind of like emotionally deep at times that we didn't expect. Because a lot of artists, it's hard for artists, and especially artists who are fringe artists. They're human beings, and it's complicated because art and commerce coming together. The record business, in order to stay in business, needs to sell records, and then you have artists who are very fiercely artistic and unique, and selling records by those people is hard. So there's this kind of constant tension, and if you're a sensitive person, it's rough. And we covered quite a few artists that had struggles with that, and it was really kind of like an interesting psychological dive into what it means to be a creative person in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it's true in general that when you're sort of seeing something from the outside, whether it's a musician or a movie star or some kind of public figure, it's kind of easy to slip into sort of forgetting that these are real people that have real human emotions, independent from the public persona or the public image that you get presented.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It's very, we all fall into it. And if you spend enough time around a musician or, someone famous or someone, almost famous, you realize pretty quickly that they are an actual person, not a song that you love or a record cover that you've been looking at your whole life. They're actually people. Is
Yeah.
That's one of the I think that's one of the things that we shine a light on in this podcast that I'm really happy with.
So the way that you're describing it, would I be right in thinking that you've already recorded all of the episodes, at least for like this batch that you're planning to put out there?
Yeah, we have 12 episodes in the can, and three are out now, and every 2 weeks a new episode comes out.
Okay. So there is a story that I want to get into with you, which I guess will be in the hat. I don't know if it gets pulled out of the hat, but before getting to that particular topic, I wanted to get into a bit more of your own history. So you were, not wishing to age you, but just for the purposes of understanding your place in the music world, you were born in like 56, 57? around about there?
55
55.
actually.
Okay.
The year that rock and roll was born.
So thinking from that perspective, from that sort of public notion of when rock and roll became this mainstream popular movement. So I understand that getting a Dwayne Eddy record when you were a kid was a really significant moment for you. What are other things that you remember? What are your earliest recollections of rock and roll?
Well, I grew up in the Philadelphia area. I grew up in Camden, New Jersey, which is right across the river from Philadelphia. And so the mashed potato and the twist, all that stuff was happening. Doo-wop was huge in my neighborhood. Probably the first music I was exposed to was doo-wop. There were actually guys on the street corner harmonizing. It's not a cliche. It wasn't made up for Sha Na Na or anything, or American Graffiti or anything. It actually existed. And there were quite a few a cappella groups in my neighborhood that I grew up hearing. So by the time the Beatles came along, I was already a rock and roll fan. I um, I think it was 1962 or 63. My uncle gave me a Dwayne Eddy record, which I just played over and over and over again. And I was hooked. And I was only 6 years old at the time. And I already knew that rock and roll was a language that I was already fluent in. I was just born into it or something. I don't know. You just have that feeling. And, uh, and that led me through, everything that came along. I just, uh, you know, gobbled up. And I started playing in bands when I was 12. Started out as a drummer, and I learned pretty quickly how you can either make people dance as a drummer or inspire them not to if you're a bad drummer. So uh, I would play all these dances, and dancing was really important in my neighborhood. So if you played a dance and no one danced, they wouldn't ask you back. So as a drummer, I had to learn pretty quickly how to keep people on the dance floor. And that pretty much informed everything I did from that point up. I wanted to start writing songs, so I had to learn how to play guitar. And if you start out as a drummer, your right hand is already okay as far as strumming. You got to figure out the other hand. But if you're a drummer, you already have rhythm, and it's already been proven that you know what you're doing. So, uh, then I became a singer-songwriter. But I didn't really start my career until I was almost 30 years old. I was working regular jobs. I worked as a landscaper. I drove a truck. I never went to college or anything. So I went right out of high school into the workforce and became a father at a very young age. So I was writing songs in obscurity up until I was almost 30 years old. And then I started playing them for people. And pretty quickly, the record business became interested in me. I was very surprised because I didn't know whether my songs were any good or not because I never played them for anybody. You know, I was just writing them. And so I became a professional right around the time I turned 30 years old.
So, what do you remember about your entry into the music business? Because I guess you must have been aware of the music industry. You're aware of records being put out. Aware of different labels, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm curious to know at that time, it seems to me from the outside that for a lot of people, it would sort of seem like this closed world, and you can't just sort of like step into a studio and go like, oh, I'm going to record a record. Like you kind of have to be part of the system. So how did that sort of get introduced to you?
That's very true what you just said because home recording equipment had not progressed to the point where you can make a good sounding record at home. So you needed to get a record deal. And in order to get a record deal, you needed a manager who would book you in a showcase and invite all these people from labels to see you. And you needed a budget to make a record. And uh, that that's totally different than it is now. And shooting videos cost a lot of money too. Everything cost a lot of money back then. So you had to play ball. You had to attract people who would advance you that money to make that product and then promote that product. And that required a lot of what felt like ridiculous conversations with people at record labels. Ridiculous to me, because a lot of it wasn't really about the music. It was about the marketability of who you are and what you do. So I immediately was confronted with the reality of the record business because I was fantasizing about it up until then as a rock and roll fan. We collect records and we look at it, we read about our favorite, performers and stuff, and it seems very glamorous. And once you get into it, you realize you have to pay attention. And so it was a bit of what I remember is there were, I was a landscaper right up until I got a record deal. And I remember there were times because I had a booking agent, I had a manager, I had a publisher, I had a record label, I had a publicity person, and there were moments where I wish I was back on the truck cutting lawns because my life was so uncomplicated as a landscaper, you know. And at the end of the day, you can look at what you did and feel good about it. It was very simple, and you could daydream while you were working, and then all of a sudden, because of my songwriting, I had all of these people throwing suggestions at me, and it felt complicated to me. And I think that's why when I work with other artists, either as a record producer or whatever capacity I'm in, I have a lot of sympathy. I can pretty much imagine what they're all going through when I work with them, and I think that's why when Laura picks certain names out of the hat, my own experience of having to adjust to the world of art and commerce colliding. Um, I'm on the artist side, you know, and that's a long answer to a short question.
It's good. That's all right. It's not a bad thing. So on going back then specifically into the topic of the different people that could be pulled out of the hat. So what I wanted to ask you about was about your experiences working with Ween, because Ween are a very interesting, unusual band, and in a catalogue of always kind of quirky, odd albums and releases, there is something about 12 Country Greats, partly because it's just so sort of specific in their career. The fact that they got this, they didn't just go, oh, we're going to make a parody country album. They made a country album where they got all kinds of really experienced musicians. I think a lot from Nashville, if I'm not mistaken. They brought you in as well. So I'm kind of curious to know, for you at that moment, like, what was the call that started this project for you, and what did you know about Ween at that time?
Oh, well, I know I've known those guys since they were teenagers, and we go
Ah,
way back.
okay.
So, yeah, I used to play a club in Trenton, New Jersey called City Gardens, and Mickey and Aaron, that's their real names. Mickey would sneak in to the club. He was probably 16 at the time, I think, and he gave me a tape. He said, here's my thing. It's called Ween," and I listened to it. It was just a cassette of Mickey and Aaron inhaling helium and laughing, and that was it. And I said to him, "I don't hear a song. Get back to me when you have songs." And we kept in touch, and then we always had made plans to work together at some point. I just knew them. They were kids. And we made plans. We always talked about working together. We didn't know in what capacity. And while those guys were signed to Elektra and making records and being on MTV and everything, I was working in Nashville as a songwriter, co-writing, and spending a lot of time on Music Row and in studios down there. And they called me up and said, "We want to make a country record and we want you to produce it." And so going to Nashville and hiring those musicians, that was all me. That was all me because they just wanted to make a country record. And I go, "Well, if we're going to do this, let's be really conceptual with it. Let's really do it. Let's go to Nashville. I'll find out how many of the old A-team players are still working because these guys were just on the verge of retirement. They were just on the verge of collecting their union pension. Pig Robbins, Charlie McCoy, all these people, you see their names. If you Google their names, it's unbelievable the amount of hit records that you'll recognize that they played on. Everything from Pretty Woman by Roy Orbison to Patsy Cline, all this stuff. It just, the lists go on and on and on. And we luckily, we hit at the right time because these guys were maybe 1 year shy of, because you can't hire them. Once they retire, they're not allowed to work. The union, musicians union in Nashville is very strict. You are not allowed to do any sessions because you're collecting your pension now. You're out. And it's a big decision for these players. Like, when am I going to retire? And we got them right before they all retired. A lot of them are not alive anymore. And I booked time at Bradley's Barn, which is a legendary studio. Again, if you Google that, your head will explode when you find out what records were recorded there. And, Ween, big country fans. I'm a huge country fan. Our musical tastes are very similar. So we just went down there. We were very familiar with each other. And I already knew some of the players down there and had worked in the studio. So it was a real natural fit. It may seem like an odd, it's a weird record for Ween because it's the only album where they stick to one genre for the entire album. I think that's why it's kind of shocking. And not only that, but everything is in tune.
Yeah.
But these session guys are amazing. So it is the most in tune Ween record, and they don't stray into psychedelic and then do a song that sounds like Madonna or Prince, or like they do. They're amazing. Uh, they're channeling. Like, I know those guys really well, but there's something that's unknowable about them because I don't know how they are able to absorb and then regurgitate so many styles of music so successfully. Like, they can do something that sounds like, Phil Collins in 1985, and there's no irony to it.
That was exactly what I was going to say. Like, I think that's part of what's really enduring about them is it's not just like it's not parody. Like
No.
they're feeding into things that they are genuinely inspired by, but it's the fact that they can jump between these different styles that seems so surprising.
Well, I think what's great about them is the line between parody and homage is pointless to even think about. They might be making fun of it, but it's so legit. You're feeling the same thing you would feel if you heard, a Madonna record or whatever it is. They're amazing. They're I don't use the word genius much, but those two guys, uh, my man, they're awesome. I love those guys.
So what was that dynamic like in the studio, and how did that run as a recording session?
It was very easy going. I contacted each session player ahead of time and let them know that there were some blue lyrics, on the record, and I wanted to make sure that they were comfortable with that. That there was going to be some scatological humor on the record, and we lost a couple players. One guy, he was a deacon in his church, so he said, I can't do this. And we had one guy, Danny Davis, who he put out a bunch of records as a Nashville brass. They were kind of like a country version of the Tijuana brass, and we wanted him to write some trumpet parts to put on the record. And he said, "Yeah, send me the demo." So I sent him the demo, and it was like Mr. Richard Smoker. And I'm still waiting for him to call back. He just stopped answering his phone. He never heard from him again. But the other guys were all cool about it, and they were very friendly. What they really liked is that Mickey and Aaron and we were very familiar with the records that these guys have played on, and they don't get recognition that often, the way we gave it to them. Because I was thrilled. We were thrilled to be in the same room with Pig Robbins. I mean, Pig Robbins, uh, legendary piano player, and he was really funny. Am I allowed to curse on this podcast?
Yeah.
Because Pig Robbins, he's blind, so he gets led in, and he's introduced to me, and he goes, "So here we got some real country motherfuckers in here today." So he was into it, and I mean, it was beautiful, and it was really like over in about 3 days. I mean, we cut all the tracks in 2 days because those guys, it's all live. There's hardly any overdubs on that record. And then we brought the Jordanaires in on the third day to sing background vocals, and then we started mixing it. The whole thing was probably done in 4 days.
And from that topic of there not being much in the way of overdubs, something I remember years ago reading a very comprehensive biography of Elvis, and it went through the the early Sun Record days, and at that time in the 50s, where essentially, you would be a tight recording unit, you would go in, you would play, like with your thing you mentioned at the beginning about having the harmonica take that didn't get recorded. It's like if you're playing your part, if you make a mistake, you're going to have to do the part again. There's not going to be any punching in. And
No.
obviously, a lot in technology has changed over the years, and there can be advances which can be taken advantage of. But at the same time, I do feel like looking back, like listening back to records from the 50s or the 60s where there wasn't the opportunity to go in and like touch up mistakes, it feels like sort of the onus is really on the power of the performance. So I wonder if that's something that you've taken with you, where you, as a producer, you would rather have more of a live take, or does it really just depend on the recording?
Oh, a live take for sure. I mean, that's always preferable to get the energy in the room, to get a real, where everybody's really listening to each other and communicating. Uh, Getting that is always the preferred way to work. Now, some situations the budget doesn't allow because the studio doesn't have enough separation with vocal booths and everything to be able to do that. So, uh, like I worked with Alan Vega
Yeah.
of Suicide, and he taught me, and this is before I produced the Ween record. He taught me a lot because he refused to discuss what we were about to do. Um, his whole approach to making music was no expectations. Let's not know what's going to happen. Let's just push record and start. And we worked together, Alan and Alex Chilton. We made a record together called Cubist Blues, and Alex liked to work that way too. And working with those guys really freed me up to trust that everybody in the same room can work if the environment feels right. And with the Ween country record, the environment was immediately right because that's how those guys work down there. You know, when you hire session musicians, you hire them in a 3 hour block. And what you get everything you want to get done within that 3 hour block. And if you don't get it done, you're into another 3 hour block. You can't just book on one more hour. You're into another 3 hour block. And because of that, those players know how to give you what you need immediately. Like a lot of the on the Ween record, a lot of those were first takes. They would listen to the demo, and Charlie McCoy would write out a chart, and then he would photocopy it, and then put it on everybody's music stand, and they would have a brief discussion about tempo and who was going to maybe answer in verse two, dobro or piano or fiddle, whatever it was going to be, and then it would count it off, and it would be perfect. Like when it was over, I would say, "What do you want to do next?" It was amazing. It was amazing, and I've worked out, on the West Coast too. When I was doing TV music, I worked with a lot of union session guys, and that was the same thing because you don't get called back if you make mistakes, and if you make a mistake, you're forcing all the other musicians to start the song from the top again. So you just can't make mistakes. And it's
Yeah.
it's incredible too because especially with the Nashville guys, the feel they had felt like they had all the time in the world, and there's like a laziness to the way they play. But they're on the clock, and they've been on the clock for years. So it's an interesting combination of laid back sound with a high pressure, industry thing happening.
Yeah.
I found it to be really inspiring. It was great to work with those guys. It's always great to work with people who are not neurotic. You know, I mean, and there's no room for neurosis when you're on the clock like that. You
Yeah.
shouldn't be play if you're neurotic, you're not going to get hired because there are no second takes. a lot of the time, and you can't have you have to really be free with your talent and let it flow out of you when you're under pressure, and it's a rare thing for
Yeah.
musicians. That's why those guys, got hired so often for so many records because they could deliver under those circumstances, and they're unique circumstances. Music is a flowing thing based on feeling, and when you have the money people needing product, again, this is the art and commerce thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of the theme of being in the business is you're always finding different ways to live in harmony with that, I guess.
Well, talking a bit more about sort of the mechanics of this harmony or otherwise between art and commerce. So taking Alan Vega and Suicide. So I know that they were a huge influence for a lot of bands that came up through punk and hardcore. So lots of people like Black Flag and loads of other people that came out in the sort of hardcore scene of the 80s point towards Suicide as being a big inspiration for them. And I know that
Yeah,
for a lot of underground bands in the 80s, there was this kind of conceptual notion that if you signed with a major label, this was a kind of betrayal. And that has been a sort of a tension for a lot of bands about whether they signed with a major or not. Like, is that an okay thing to do? And I've also interviewed
right.
people who've said that, well, I've had experience with major labels and with independent labels, and I've had good experiences and bad experiences with both. So there's not necessarily kind of like just a simple answer to say like, well, major labels are like this and independent labels are like this. But I wonder for you and your experiences in the music business, to what extent have you sort of seen a clear divide between what is the major versus the independent versus all of this just sort of being over, interweaving and overarching together in sort of a way that you can't really separate the two?
Wow, an interesting question. There are good labels and bad labels. There are good chapters in a good label and a bad chapter in a good label. It depends on who is your point person at the label a lot of the time, whether it's a major or an independent. Does someone really believe in you at that label? And if you get signed based on the one person that believes in you, and then that person leaves that label, all of a sudden you're lost. And that can happen at every level. That can, and that's true in a lot of other lines of work too. But especially in the music business, you need a champion. So it depends on the people at the label, because I've known people signed to big major record label deals and it really worked out, and I've known some who have been signed and it didn't work out at all because they got lost in the shuffle. And that can happen in the indie world too. An indie label could sign too many artists and kind of forget who they have on the roster. So it's uh, I my experience in the music business was, and this is ironic, really, because I was always being told, pick a lane, stay in that lane, and then we'll be able to figure out how to market you. And I couldn't do it. And I got a reputation for being a little too weird for the record business. And then mainstream network television hires me to do music, and they encourage me to be as weird as I want. So I was too weird for the record business, but not for network TV, which I find very amusing. But the but I have sympathy for people at record labels. They have to figure out how to sell records, because their job's on the line if they're not selling records. So when they're confronted with an artist who won't play ball or is too diverse for them to figure out a marketing plan and a way to educate the public on who this artist is and what you can expect from them consistently moving forward, it's a tough business. It's a speculative business. Uh, they're sinking money into artists that the label may never make that money back on some of these people. And it could be the artist's fault, and it could be the label's fault. It could be any, you know, a variety of reasons why things go right and things go wrong. Like I said, at every level of the business. Um, and with Alan Vega, for example, no marketing person would ever invent the idea of suicide.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Nobody was asking for that. And but we're still adjusting. Actually, that first album still sounds ahead of its time to me. Sometimes when I listen to it, I'm like, really? Wow, I can't even believe it exists.
Yeah.
Uh, Jonathan Richman's another great example. No one would ever uh, get a piece of notebook paper down there and write down what Jonathan is and say this is what we need. So the more individualistic artists don't fare as well on major labels because it's hard for those labels to break the rules and come up with unique marketing plans specifically for that artist. They have a way of doing things like a pipeline, and they make adjustments here and there. If it's Tom Petty or if it's whoever it is, they make some adjustments, but they still are kind of sending it down an established pipeline. And if you get somebody like Jonathan Richman or Suicide or Alex Chilton, you know, uh, you're going to have trouble right away because it's just not going to work. That paradigm, that template that they use is not going to work. And then you're faced with how much time are we going to spend going outside of this template and fine tuning and customizing what we do for one artist? And it depends on how much money those labels have to spend on that sort of thing, or whether they're even willing to break the mold. Um, it's it's such a crazy business. And like I said, it's like a speculative business. They're panning for gold in a lot of ways. And at the end of the day, did they get any nuggets, or is it just dust?
Yeah.
So it's in a speculative business, you're going to have continual uncertainty about everything, really.
Now, it does seem to me, I'm only in my 40s, but I've sort of been a music fan for most of my life. And it's one of my simple pleasures in life to get a good music biography from whatever era it is and just basically learn about some scene or some band or some artist or some era. And it seems to me that there was a time in popular music where artists would be given, certainly by today's terms, quite a while in order to evolve.
That's
Like
true.
like I,
That's
I
true.
feel like, was it with like Aretha Franklin? Like it was sort of half a dozen records into her career before she had a hit, and that doesn't seem to be conceivable anymore. So am I right
That
about that?
is, you are completely right about it. And a good example of that would be Warner Brothers in the late 60s, early 70s. Van Dyke Parks, Ry Cooder, Randy Newman, Little Feat, the list goes on of albums that did not make any money. And they stuck with them and they gave them a budget. And Lenny Waronker, he just believed that the way to go, was these people are really, really talented. And eventually, Captain Beefheart, you know, Frank Zappa, uh, that the public would catch on and that they would eventually sell records. That is not, I'm guessing, is not there. I don't know what major labels are up to nowadays. I don't understand what a major label release even is really anymore because of streaming and a la carte, buying of MP3s. I don't have a good feel of what the record industry is doing right now, the major label record industry. I have a pretty good grip on what's happening on the indie scale. But yeah, they were willing to finance and stick with these artists for quite a while. So development was a big thing
Yeah.
back then. I'm not sure now. I don't know.
Well, I was going to ask you as well your thoughts on how you see streaming services having impacted. So, if, as you say, you're more in the midst of independent labels these days, how do you sort of see the impact that streaming services have had on that world? With selling records at least still being a part of how art, well, I mean, in terms of labels, that's basically how labels are going to make their money is through selling records or having some kind of deal with streaming services.
That would be a great question for my co-host because she's in the business. I'm not in the business. I'm like a freelance weirdo. I don't know what I am. Just uh, uh, I am not in the trenches anymore with that stuff. And but Laura is in the record business. Sun Records. They just won a Grammy for a blues album. So that she's really in it and probably could answer that question with a lot of analytical, analytics
Yeah.
that I don't have. I don't have that information. I'm not following it that way. I have a record coming out in October, backed up by Deer Tick. I don't know if you're familiar with Deer Tick. They're a band from Rhode Island. They're really, really cool indie, pretty big indie band. And we went into the studio and they're backing me up and the record's coming out in October. And I'm really curious because it's time for me to be re-educated on what's going on. So I'll have an answer for that in about a year. I could probably give you a really good answer to that question because I haven't been paying attention. I really haven't been. I've been living, you know, in parts unknown up in the desert, in my own dream world, basically, for the last 10 years. And, but I'm about ready to put out a record. Uh, and I am really looking forward to learning what the environment is like now. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yeah. And so how significant and how much of your time is taken up with performing these days?
I perform a lot locally in bars and in small coffee houses and stuff. I like being on stage. I started out, 12 years old playing music, and I remember I was a drummer, but they would bring me out to sing one song, and a guitar player would go back and play drums, and I would sing this song called "Wine, Wine, Wine" by the Nightcaps. You get a nickel, I'll get a dime. We'll go out and buy some wine, drinking wine, wine, wine. And everybody thought it was really funny that a 12-year-old kid is singing about getting drunk. So it was a really popular part of our act. And immediately I felt like, wow, there's a communal, like everybody's in a good mood all of a sudden. I really like that aspect I really like watching the audience react to something that is being sent out there with good intentions, and receiving it back. That interaction, I got addicted to it, when I was 12. So I like being on stage. I don't care if there's 8 people in the audience or I'm playing somewhere with 3,000 people in a theater. That's irrelevant. Just the connection. So I'm on stage quite a bit. I'm in a surf instrumental band called the Everglades with Pete Curry from Low Straitjackets. I perform as an acoustic performer, solo, and also with my bass player, Teresa. And then I have an electric band that I play and playing all my songs. And I'm I pretty much say yes to every offer that comes in. And and for me, it's I'm not doing this as a career. This is something I need to do in order feel connected to life and humanity, and other people. And so performing is very important to me. I'm on stage a lot.
Yeah. So you said that before you had your break, so to speak, when you were getting close to 30, you were working doing landscaping. So you're working outside of the music world. And the way you're describing what you're doing now is that it's the passion of creating and the passion of music as opposed to it being a career. But was there a point during your working life where you said, I am actually like, this is the career that I have within the music world, whether that was as a recording artist or as a producer or both?
Oh yeah, when I got a record deal, sure. You know, uh, you're forced to recognize that you are now in the business because other people they're now dependent on you and expecting things from you. It became obvious to me really fast that I was now in the business. Whether I could stay in the business, I wasn't sure about. But and like I said before, I kind of wish there were days when I wish I could go back to being a landscaper because you know that was an uncomplicated life. But no, I've always felt from the time I was a kid, I knew I didn't know whether I was going to be a disc jockey or a songwriter or a performer or a guy who ran a record label. I'm also a graphic artist. So I would draw fake album covers when I was a kid. I have notebooks full of these fake album covers. So, at some level in the music business, I knew I was employable if the right person met me and recognized that, how passionate I was about it and how I don't know connected to music I am. And it eventually, came true. And that's why I was able to work with a lot of older artists because, someone like Arthur Alexander or Dan Penn, uh, they meet a lot of people who love their music, but when they met me, they could tell that I understood something a little deeper and that they could trust me because I understood that. That has been kind of a thread through my career is that I am very protective of artists. And I also am very protective of their own legacy, like helping them find the best part of themselves. And even like the Ween record, as odd as that record is, it's a pure album. It's a 100% pure album. There's not one false crass move on that record. And it's musically legitimate and also very funny and weird. Like everything that you would want to protect and have, I protected and delivered on. And it's a crusade for me, really. It's never been about the money. It's always been about like, can we make the best record, in this environment and creating an environment to make that record in is very important. Picking the right studio and the right musicians and paying attention to all the right things, picking the right songs. Uh, it's it, it's I've known since I was a kid that I had something to give in the record business, and so when I finally landed in the record business, I was like, yes. It took a long time, but here I am.
So was there on the other side then a point where you would say you were no longer in the business to the extent that you were before?
Well, in 1995, I was hired to do music for Third Rock from the Sun, a TV show. And that changed everything because the vortex of work, episodic TV is a lot of work. The show was a hit, immediately a hit. And I was now a Hollywood composer with an agent. And pretty quickly after that, I think a year after that, I was also doing that 70s show. So now I was doing music for two shows. And I lived in that world, uh, you know, driving into a studio lot, driving into post-production facilities in Hollywood and Burbank and all these places. That was my life for about 12 years. So I left the record business and did that for a while. And then when I retired from TV music, I stepped away from it. And the idea was to go back to the record business, but the record business had completely changed by the time I re-entered, and I didn't recognize hardly any of what used to be the infrastructure. And so I never really got back in the record business the way I was before, and I'm very happy about that. Like I have a good balance, how much work I want to do and how much just enjoying life I want to do. And I was lucky that the TV music that I did gave me enough money to live this way. So I don't, I, I'm pretty relaxed about what I choose to do and what I don't do. Um, I'm always picking things for creative reasons, not for the money.
Yeah, that's a it's a great, I would say, a great position to be in for the soul.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
because
Ben,
I know what I know what it's like to be broke.
yeah.
and
Well,
you, and you and you got to make choices when you're broke that like you don't really agree with sometimes. And I'm really glad that's out of my life because I did a lot of that when I was younger.
yeah,
Uh, worked a lot of lousy jobs and worried about money a lot. And that's my roots. I come from a working class household where my parents were always worrying about money. So it's nice to be cruising now finally.
for sure. Yeah. And no one wants to be in that situation of having to worry about money, but I think it's valuable to understand that situation, to have that perspective so you can see things with more perspective.
I agree. I agree. Um, I can conjure up the fear of going to the poorhouse anytime I want. So I'm very familiar with that feeling. It's always lurking over there somewhere.
Yeah. Well, Ben, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to chat with you. I really enjoyed getting your stories and your insights. So, yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it too.